I'm looking forward to talking to you guys, and I do believe I have a word from the Lord. I don't know if you've turned on the news. There's stuff going on in the world. I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to preach this week. Come on, there's just stuff, Last night, my son had a little bit of hard time sleeping, and I was talking to my wife about it and all, and she said, come on. I mean, he's hearing all this stuff on TV, the election, and having to wear a mask to school, and, all this disruption stuff. I mean, yeah, and it's like, yeah, that's terrible. My son, my kids shouldn't have to go through that stuff. And, a few days earlier, he said something like, I just wish, my family, I wish everything could just get back to normal. I feel the same way, and I mean, some of you know, we've been wrestling with a war, trying to get my daughter better, and there has been some progress being made lately, and we're very thankful for that. But my daughter spoke to me on Tuesday, and she said, Dad, are they going to riot and burn down the cities? And I'm thinking, my kids shouldn't have to be, thinking like that. I mean, this is not the heart of the Lord. This is not what Jesus wants. And I know, I don't know, I know we got the faithful here tonight, and I know there's a lot of people asking questions and struggling. And I was talking with an evangelist. I got a new evangelist friend that lives here in town, and looking forward to letting Steve and Kathy meet him. He's actually a Nazarene, but he's a Spirit-filled Nazarene guy. His name's Dan Bohai, and he's a really great evangelist. People have been telling me for 5 years, you got to meet Dan Bohai. He likes to pray for the sick and all. Like, well, introduce me to him. And I finally got a chance to hang out with him and made a great connection. But he told me as he's traveling around, all the churches are 50% smaller than they were. I said, all of them. I said, that shouldn't be that way. It's not right. It's not right for the churches to lose ground. It's not right for our children to be anxious. It's not right for us to have to fight just to connect and be and do and all the issues. And I'm not trying to take a side in any area, but all across the board, we shouldn't have to be living through these kinds of things. Don't you agree with that? I mean, and I know we won't forever. I know there's going to be breakthroughs of God. But, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about some of the things we're walking through in this, and particularly kind of getting inspired by my children. And I don't know about some of you, but I know I've talked with some people here from the church, and they've said, Pastor JD, maybe I'm feeling a little lonely, or I'm feeling a little disconnected, or there's some people, they're like, as this stuff gets intense, they kind of want to withdraw. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a common thing to happen, but it's not what we want. It's not what I want. And so I've been kind of praying, like, God, what do you want me to say? Like, there's a lot going on, and we need some answers, and we need to get God in the midst of our own wrestling matches, right? And I feel like, there's so many things I'd like to be preaching to you about, but I think I sometimes just want to preach about the elephant in the room. That's finding a way forward in the midst of all of this stuff. Getting answers, maybe finding ways to take where we're at right now and really advance in God. Does anybody want to do? I want to do that. And so I was praying about some things along this line, and I've got a story I want us to turn to. If you got a Bible, hopefully you do. If you don't, I think they pop it back behind my head. Genesis chapter 37, verse 2. We're going to wrestle tonight with the story of Joseph. How many of you guys have grown up with Joseph? Joseph in the coat of many colors. Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph. And I was preaching this story, and I read through the story several times, and I'm like, this is a problem. This is like 8 chapters. We can't do that. So we're not going to do that. Don't worry. But there's some dynamics from Joseph. Because see, Joseph is a unique figure, and I think sometimes we've heard the story almost too much, and there's some elements, there's some things I think God wants to talk to us about tonight. On some level, I think we're more like Joseph than we may think about, and sometimes there's things that he went through that could really help us today, I believe. So let's look at this, verse 2, and we're going to be skipping around a little bit between chapters 37 and chapters 45. But let's look at this. Joseph, a young man of 17. How old are you, Isaac? 17, okay. Imagine Isaac here, some kid probably shorter than Isaac, of course. He was Jewish after all. Says he was tending the flocks with his brothers, and he had 10 other brothers. And he brought their father a bad report about them. It's that little brother that's going to go and tell on what all the big brothers are doing, right? Now, there's a tendency we start reading the story of Joseph, and he, of course, is an admirable character, but sometimes we don't actually see him in the beginning the way he really was. Joseph seemed to get a lot of joy out of making sure his brothers got punished for all their infractions. And I can only imagine reading through some of the other stories in the Bible, Judah and Reuben. I mean, there's some really off-color stories in the Bible, so these guys must have been pretty wild. But here he is, he's going and telling on them. He's making sure the punishment is being brought against his own brothers. I don't know, I kind of feel bad for him because I had younger brothers and they got me in trouble all the time. Verse 3 here, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. He made this beautiful tapestry and gave it to him. And so, this didn't go over real well. Joseph is running his mouth a lot. He's walking around in this really nice coat. And because he came from the wife his father preferred, he's kind of getting special privilege. Joseph is living in the lap of luxury. He's eating the good stuff. He's getting the good jobs. His dad overlooks all his bad stuff. You parents that have a lot of kids, your first kid, you really hold them in line. Your last kid, it's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, just clean up when you're done. Verse 5 here, it says Joseph had a dream. God's beginning to speak to him. He had a dream, and then he told it to his brothers. And they hated him all the more. I mean, he just can't stop talking. Just flapping his gums. Just running at the mouth, I know we like Joseph, but let's just be honest. He's not as admirable yet. He said to them, listen to this dream that I had. Come on, listen to me. I got this thing that God did. And to be fair, God is really doing it in him. But not a lot of wisdom on how he's relating to the people he's doing life with. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while all your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it, Can you see them? Some of these brothers got to be, they're a couple of decades older than him. Like, what? What, we're bowing down to you, you punk kid? I don't think so. Now, as we are going to know in the story, Joseph, he's hearing from God, but there's not a lot of wisdom on how he's speaking. Not a lot of wisdom on how he's relating. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he'd said. Then he had another dream. Hey, you want to hear my next dream, guys? I mean, me and God, we're just hanging out. He's talking to me. I hear him more than the TV preachers, I got a direct line to heaven, boys. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon And the stars, 11 stars, are bowing down to me. You know, you read Genesis, that speaks of governance, authority. And when he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him, said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down before you?" Now, what we have to understand as we're hearing this is Joseph is really beginning to experience some true things from God. But he's not a mature man. He doesn't have the wisdom that he should have. He has a hunger for God, but he doesn't necessarily know how to do life with the people that God has given to him. I don't know. Any ever identify with that? I mean, I watch people get a touch from God or whatever. You know, it's like, it's great to get a touch from God. It's great to get activated in the gifts of the Spirit, but do you know how to do life with people? Treat them with honor and respect. So Joseph has got a pretty good life. Kind of like some of you in February of 2020. Man, you're going to the movies. You're getting hands laid on you at church. Bam! You know, you're eating steak, getting to walk in the restaurant without a face diaper and all that, you know. Some things changed. I mean, Joseph, he's got it good. He doesn't know his life's about to change. So his father sends him out to go and check on his brothers, and they're going to go to Dothan there, verse 17. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them. But when they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. That's rough. It's a rough family there. I mean, everybody's like, "Oh, I have it so bad." Does your family want to kill you? Some of you are like, "Yeah, maybe." "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him. Throw him in one of these cisterns. We'll just say a ferocious animal devoured him. That's what we'll tell our dad. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." You know, and they'd have these places they would dig out the ground and they'd put plaster in, and when it would rain, it would fill up with water. And they said, let's throw him in there and maybe we'll kill him. Verse 23, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. They're stripping him of his strength, of his position, of his honor. The ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him in the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And so they're really going to think about killing him. And, you know, Reuben kind of tries to slow him down because Reuben's the oldest, and he knows this is not a good idea. But Judah, he's very impetuous, you know, and they're talking about it. They're really thinking about it. They're this angry at how their brother speaks to them. You know, and just as a side note here, guys, sometimes in church, we do have to be careful how we talk to people. How we do life with people that God has given to us. Are we treating them right? Are we honoring people? Just because you can doesn't always mean you should. That's another sermon, though. They looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. That's kind of a mouthful. Can you say that? Ishmaelites. These are people that are descendants from Ishmael, and they're Arabic, coming from Gilead, and their camels were loaded down with spices, balm, and myrrh. They're on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "Hey, I got a great idea. What gain will we have if we kill our brother and have to cover up his blood? I mean, how's that going to help us out? It's kind of messy. Come, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. I mean, let's not kill him. He is our brother, you know." And the brothers agreed. So the Midianite merchants came by. The brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And we keep going on and on about this, but I think it's safe to say that Joseph's life changed quite a bit in this moment. He's living life, everything's going normal, and suddenly his whole world is crashing down. His whole world is being disrupted. I mean, yeah, he's his father's favorite, but now that beautiful coat that he had is gone. The beautiful food that he could eat, the privilege that he had in his own home are gone. He is now enchained. He is now ensnared. He's now leaving the land that he knew so well, hearing people speak whose language he may not have understood, going far from home. He's only 17 years old. He's kind of impetuous. He's got a mouth that just runs and runs. Yeah, but he means well. And here his whole life, Joseph has been overrun by a crisis. He's been overrun by a terrible disruption. Everything that he knew, everything that he had has been taken from him now. Does anybody identify with that? You know, all over our nation, you know. Some about my kids earlier. Some of you in this room. People have had things taken from them. They're feeling anxiety. They're watching the television. They're seeing things about the election. They're watching and they're feeling, and people have lost their jobs, and it's like this thing comes at them, and you didn't plan for it. You didn't ask for it. And now you're going a direction you never expected you would go. All over the U.S., churches and pastors fighting things that a year ago they had no idea they were going to have to deal with. They were actually planning their 2020 vision sermon that didn't really work out the way they expected. That's a bad joke, sorry, but it didn't quite work out the way some of them did on January 1st there. But so here's Joseph. He means well, but he's now encountering a dark night of the soul. Have you say, I've got it bad right now. Well, did your own family betray you? Have you been taken far from your home? Have you now been enslaved to someone? Imagine how it feels. They bring him up and some guy pays for him, Potiphar, and he's going to start working at this house. And he's now, under someone else's control. And, we reread these stories, and I think, sometimes we read them with kind of a, I don't know, you want to call it rose-colored glasses. We see, this nice life he had. No, he was a slave in Egypt. Now, Potiphar is going to notice him and notice some of the great things he's able to do and bless him on some level, but he's still a slave. He has no agency, no opportunity to make choices for himself, really. And he's entrapped. His family has betrayed him. He's far from home. He's in Egypt, and now he's stuck in this house and having to work and do things that he never had to do before. Then it gets worse. The master's wife decides she likes him. I'm trying to see how many kids are in the room, but it did not go over well. She wanted to seduce him. She wanted to go somewhere that was wrong. And Joseph is a man of honor. He's a man of high regard. He did not want to dishonor his master. He did not want to dishonor his God. And he said no, he would not fall to that level. But now she lies about him, accuses him of trying to rape her, accuses him of being someone that's violent and vile. So now he goes from being, abandoned by his family. He's going from being enslaved to now being in prison. Some of you say, well, I've had, everybody's talking about how bad 2020 is. I don't know. That was probably a worse year for him. Probably a worse year. He wasn't just mildly inconvenienced, stuck at home. He's actually dealing with real problems. He's dealing with real, things pressing down on him. He's dealing with with the violence and the kinds of things that would happen in a very wretched Egyptian society. Egyptian society was very vile, in these different areas too, the sexual areas and all. And here he is trying to live for God, trying to walk in the things of God, and he's thrown in this world that he has no knowledge of, and he's having to navigate it, and he's in the middle of a crisis. He's in the dark winter. He's wrestling. He's trying to find his way. What do when you get thrown into the dark night of the soul? What do you do when you're trying to wrestle through a pandemic? What do you do? It gets worse. He's in prison, and he makes some contacts with some royal officials. And by the anointing of God, he begins to speak and reveal truths. And they appreciate what he says. And he says, hey, why don't you put a good word in for me and get me out of this dump? And they said, sure thing. 2 years go by and they didn't do anything. We start reading the story of Joseph, and we think it's like a 3-month journey. Joseph, from the time he left his family to the time he began to arise in stature, was 14 years. I meet all kinds of Christians. They say, man, JD, I have a call in my life, and I just don't know why I'm over here in this corner. I don't know why, I'm not doing this amazing thing. It's like, whoa, yeah, I've been waiting 6 months. To do this thing. Or it's like, this guy's like in a horrible place for years. His family betrays him. He's enslaved to an Egyptian officer. He's lied about it by this officer's wife, cast into prison. And in prison, he's forgotten by people that promised to help him. I don't know, that sounds like a pretty rough life. Sounds like something a lot of us would think it would excuse us to start complaining. Start telling people how people did you wrong. Start crying and whining and call the year a dumpster fire or whatever, I don't want to try to make light of our own pain. In fact, that's kind of my point here. I do know today in this room and people that are part of our church that aren't here, I know there's been a lot of pain. I know there's been a lot of anxiety. The things that my children are telling me are really the things they feel. So I'm not trying to make light of the things we're feeling in our nation, the uncertainty we feel about the future of our nation, about economics, about our church and who and what and where. I think all of us feel these things. I can preach this message right now, I believe, in part because on some level, all of us are right now in the dark winter, on some level. It's not the heart of God, but for whatever reason, we find ourselves wandering through a season. Nobody likes it. Nobody wants it. Nobody asked for it. But here we are. Joseph, he's chained up. I'm sure he's telling his brothers, you're joking, right? Come on, you're not really going to sell me to the Arabic traders to Egypt, right? Come on. Bye. Can you imagine how that felt? Can you imagine being in prison because someone lied about you? But here's the thing I want to get to. This is what I'm actually preaching about. All this has been just set up for this. Joseph got into the middle of a crisis. He got in the middle of a dark night. He entered that winter season. He entered that thing. And he didn't ask for it. He didn't want it. And it was terrible, and it was wretched, and it was long, and it was lonely. and it was difficult. But the question is, what did he do in the midst of his crisis? See, the thing that God has been talking to me about, to me first and foremost, but I think to all of us, is what are you going to do in your crisis? How do you respond in the dark night of the soul? How do you respond when it looks like nothing is going your way? How do you respond when everything falls apart? Let's talk about Joseph here for a minute, if we can. What did he do? Well, he learned to be content and to be prosperous and to be fruitful in everything that he got stuck in. You know, he goes over to Potiphar's house, and the next thing you know, he's working the land, and he's organizing the cattle, and he's helping set up the business affairs, and it gets so good that the only thing Potiphar had to worry about was what he was going to eat. You say he was a slave. It's terrible. Yeah, he was, but he got in there and actually created something amazing. Rather than complaining about his enslavement, he took the environment that he was in and transformed it. And this man, this boy, really, who had such a loose tongue and he just would say whatever, begins to learn to be more strategic with his words. He begins to learn to be very appropriate. In his dark night, in his pandemic, in his crisis, in his turmoil, he begins to learn to hear even more dynamically the voice of God. Being able to hear and dream and envision. His crisis, his turmoil turns him deeper into the realm of the Spirit. In the midst of all this, he became seasoned, strong, became one with more wisdom, insight, revelation. This is an amazing story. This is a guy who had every excuse to give up. This is a guy who had every reason to be bitter and to complain and just not show up and not deliver, not put in any effort. But Joseph is different than a lot of us. In his crisis, in his pandemic, in his dark night of the soul, he saw it as a season to grow, a season to become, a season to hear and to understand and comprehend. And the thing that God's been talking to me about, and the thing I feel like I needed to preach to you guys is this. Are you squandering your crisis? Are you letting all this garbage come at you and you're not growing from it? You're letting all this fear and anxiety and you're not using it to actually pivot yourself further into faith, hope, in hearing the voice of God. You see, here's the thing. Over and over again, Joseph did not let the outside world transform his inside world. And then what he would end up doing is eventually turning his outside world into his inside world. The hope, the faith, the productivity. I mean, you know, he's in jail and he's putting the drapes up over the bars. You know, if we're going to be stuck here, it might as well look nice, right? I know it's so strange for us to think about, but like, I mean, you know what? If you're stuck in jail, you're stuck in jail. What are you going to do? Who are you going to be? But see, I watch, and it's not very many of you in this room, I'll admit, but I watch and there's trouble, and there's anxiety, and there's worry about the election and the lives and money and all that, and it's coming at you, and I get it, but you're wasting it. Because you're not becoming stronger. You're not becoming more powerful. You're not becoming a person with greater vision and purpose. You're not becoming stronger and more rooted in God and the things of God. Some of us are withdrawing. We're pulling back. Rather than trying to do life more with the people that God has given us, we try to withdraw. Rather than trying to become and create and sort of do something in the season of barrenness, we just give up and just walk away and just say, well, COVID, like that's the excuse for giving up on life or something. I hope you're not squandering your crisis. I hope you're not letting it just, go by without you actually benefiting from it. Here's the thing I want to tell you, in life there's going to be suffering at times. The question is, are you going to get anything worthwhile out of it? You see, right now I get it. All these churches and everywhere are getting hit and hurt, and people are sad and they're trying to figure out how to, but see, I get it. But here's the thing. You can't just sit by and let these things destroy you. You've got to let it begin to strengthen you. You got to say, God, I'm just going to stick my feet down. I'm going to find you somehow. And I'm going to somehow begin to cultivate this interior world. And I may not be able to understand everything. I may not be able to control everything. I may not be able to see everything fixed right away. It might take 14 stinking years to get where I need to go. But I'm going to stand. I'm going to hear. I'm going to dream. I'm going to envision. I'm going to reconfigure and build and establish and make something fantastic where I'm at right now. Oh, but you don't understand. I'm in a crisis. I do understand. And over the last couple of years, dealing with my daughter, it's like, man, I feel like, God, have I done what I should do? Have I been strong? And sometimes I've not been as strong as I'd like to be. But I've determined I'm going to be strong. That I'm not going to let the external world change my internal world. After 14 years of captivity, Joseph finally sees a breakthrough. One of the Egyptian officials tells Pharaoh about his ability to hear God. He goes and interprets a dream. 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine is what he tells the Pharaoh. Egypt is going to have a season of blessing, and there's going to be a season of trouble. And because of his wisdom, because of the things that he has actually began to sow into in his difficult season, he is recognized as a person of stature, of wisdom, of revelation. And he begins to be installed as a second in command in Egypt. That's a pretty good upgrade, don't you think? After years of agonizing prayer, something beautiful begins to come to fruition. But that's not the end of the story here, and I'm kind of rounding a corner here. We're heading toward the back end of this. Finally, 2 years into the famine, Joseph looks up, and here comes his family. Here comes his brothers. It's been 21 years since he's seen them. 21 years before, he was an impulsive young man that ran his mouth, who wanted to be super spiritual, didn't know how to do life with them. But he's not the same now. Here comes his family. They need food. Years ago, he was the kind of brother that wanted to make sure that they got punished for every infraction, for every wrong thing. He went and told his daddy everything they did. But 21 years later, the things are different now. Something had changed in him because of the way he wandered through a crisis, because of the way he walked through the dark night of the soul. Genesis 45, verse 1. He's been talking to his brothers. He's been interacting when there's been all these interesting things going on. I'd encourage you to go and read all these chapters in between. But it says in verse 1 here that Joseph could no longer control himself. This is a brother. Joseph was a man when he was young who could not control himself, and he ran his mouth at the first instance. But now he has actually hidden himself from his brothers for some time. He could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. Here he is. He's wealthy, powerful, controlling the food, controlling many things in Egypt. And here he is coming face to face again with his own family, coming face to face with his own oppressors, with the ones that have done him wrong. Here he is. He's suffered for 14 years, lost so much. His mother was lost during this time. But here he is standing before his brothers. Verse 2, it says that he wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him. That's some mourning there. That's some wailing. 21 years of anguish. 21 years of trouble. 21 years of facing things that he didn't want to face. And he wept. There's some of us that are weeping too. We're standing before things we don't like and things that we don't want. Then Joseph said to them, "I am Joseph. Is my brother still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Joseph said, "Here I am." He pulled off all his Egyptian garb and said, "Here I am. Is Daddy still alive?" And his brothers are suddenly horrified because the second in command of Egypt is the one that they treated so poorly, the one they sent away to die, the one that they shamed, the one that they rejected. And sometimes we don't always understand the ancient world. In the ancient world, it's not like it is now. In the ancient world, when you did someone wrong, when you dishonored them, there was one thing that they would do. They would go and slit their throat. When you dishonored a family member like this, the automatic expectation would be that you would slay everyone that did you wrong, because it was a world of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And the old Joseph was very happy to make sure his brothers were punished for everything they did. But this man who had walked through the dark night of the soul, this man who had suffered great pain, this man who learned how to leverage his suffering into becoming something powerful, something holy, something wise, did not respond the way so many others did at that time. He didn't respond with violence and wrath and revenge. Joseph said, "Come close to me. Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I'm your brother. Yeah, the one that you you enslaved, but I'm your brother. He could have said, you know what? Come close to me. I am the magistrate of Egypt, and I have the sword, and I'm going to slice you in two. He could have said, I am the judge, jury, and executioner. He could have said, I am the one that controls all the food in the known world. He could have said all of those things. But he looked before his own family who had rejected him, who had shamed him and dishonored them, and told them that I am your brother. Verse 5, he said, and now don't be distressed, and don't be angry with yourselves. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, to save your lives by a great deliverance. This man who had walked through a dark night of the soul did something that was unfathomable in this era of history. I was talking with Rabbi Feldman one time about this, and he said, JD, this is an amazing portion of Scripture. He said, this is one of the first examples in all the Bible of forgiveness. See, we look through Jesus' eyes as we should. A world of forgiveness and kindness, but that didn't exist in that world at that time. It was a world of violence, of cruelty, of recompense, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And when Joseph was young, that's what he did. That's how he behaved. But somehow, in his journey, somehow in the dark night of the soul, somehow as he walked through the difficult season, God began to do something in him. He not only grew in wisdom, he not only grew in stature, he not only grew in being able to hear the voice of God, but he somehow apprehended the new covenant reality of Jesus, bringing forgiveness to the ones who had oppressed him. What are you doing with your crisis? Who are you becoming in light of the pain, the pressure, and the darkness that is around us? Who are you becoming in the midst of all the questions and the fears and the anxiety? Who are you becoming? And I'm afraid to say, I think there are many in our church who have not let this begin to leverage them into something more. They look at the TV, they look at the election, they look at the money, they look at people getting sick, and then they just get afraid, and they just withdraw, and they just get anxious. We say, what hope is there for us? And then somebody does something we don't like, and then we cut them out of our lives. If you're doing all that, I'd say you're wasting your crisis. You're just suffering and you're getting nothing out of it. The last season with my daughter, I hope I haven't wasted my crisis with her. I want to know God more. I want to have faith that is greater than what I see. I want to have a world inside me that's filled with life and joy and strength, even if everything around me is falling apart. What are you doing with what's going on around you, and who are you becoming? Could we become like Joseph, this amazing person who navigated a terrible season very well? I've got to ask you tonight. I get it. Some of you are hurting. Some of you are disappointed. Some of you don't know the next step, and you're worried about our nation, and you're wondering, I get it. Please don't waste this time. Please don't let ourselves continue to stay immature, to disengage from the people that God's called us to do life with. Please, God is calling us to be a church that better hears the voice of God, that can dream and see and envision sometimes I'm not sure you're going to get that with a shortcut. Some things only come the hard way. Sometimes maturity only comes when you rise above the challenges and the fear. And I know there are many godly and powerful people in this room tonight. I know there are many who are alive in their heart and their spirit, man. But we need to stand for this for our whole church. Around us, there's a crisis. I get it. But I hope we can spin that crisis well. You know, this isn't going to be forever. The dark night is not forever. But wouldn't it be good if we actually got something worthwhile out of it? And if we actually become something out of this? Just a little bit more until we stand before Pharaoh. Just a little bit more until we no longer are quick with the mouth. Just a little bit more until we learn to love people that are hard to love. Just a little bit more. I'll ask you to stand with me here. I know there's some people hurting here. I know there's some people afraid. I know there are people here that have heard suicidal thoughts in this season. I know, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Guys, we've got to have something alive in our inner man. That interior world, we've got to have an interior world that's so big, that's so powerful, that's so mighty, that it can overcome everything that's around us. Tonight, I just want you to begin to pray. I mean, it's time for us to press in and let God come alive in us again in a powerful way. We need to let that something of that fire of God right in the guts, right in the depths of our soul. We need to let the fire and power and glory and truth, we need to hear again what's God saying about us. If you can become who God made you to be, nothing can stop you from going the distance. If you would just embrace the identity that you already have, the things that God has already given you, the words He's already spoken over your life. And right now, I just pray that every lie that tries to break off the things spoken over you, that we would just cast that off. That right now, that we would begin to remember the things spoken, the words Kathy Gray spoke over you, that Steve Gray spoke over you, the words that you heard in worship, the truth, the calling to be strong, to be mighty, to be powerful, to be filled with life and joy and purpose. And right now I break off every design of the enemy that would hinder us, that would stop us, that would keep us from going the distance, that keep us from being strong and mighty and powerful. Lord, let us be delivered tonight. Let us be free to be, to become. Thank you, Lord. Jesus. 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 Would you just cry out to God tonight? Come on, please just cry out to God. God, I haven't let this time be enough, Lord. I haven't let it shape me the way I needed to, Lord. Teach me how to be a person that can hear you, Lord. Teach me how to be content, Lord. Lord, teach me how to do something great in the prison, in the slave house. Teach me. Teach me. Teach me, Lord. Teach me, Lord. Let that inside, let my inside, let these people's inside come alive. Jesus. I just speak over this church that we are going to do amazing things. That even if we face a crisis, that this crisis is actually going to make us better. That we're going to be stronger, and that we're going to come out on the other end with more wisdom, more compassion, more love, more anointing, more value, and then we're going to stick together even more as the days go by. And right now I prophesy over this church the good things, the great things that have been destined that this church is supposed to do and be. And I pray that any kind of enemy, any voice, any wicked thing that would try to hinder, hurt, distort, stop, we would be pushed back, and that we would rise up in the destiny, calling, and purposes of God. Nothing can stop you. No COVID thing can stop you. No external thing can stop you. The things that God has in you is bigger than anything in this world. So rise up in the